Hey everyone, Duke here, and welcome to the first look at the Nightmare Harvester artifact in Season of the Haunted. You get this artifact from doing the opening mission of the season, and we're going to take our first look at it today. I've not looked at any of these mods ahead of time, so we're just going to go right through it. Looks like we've got anti-barrier sidearm to start this season, which is, sidearms are not always the most exciting, but hopefully we have some other barrier options. We've got overload, SMG, and auto rifle again. A lot of people had big fun with that last season. Not huge fans, but we'll see if we have anything a little bit better than that as well. We got Unstoppable Scout Rifle, which is a solid mod. Definitely very, very solid to stun champions from a distance. Scout Rifles are always pretty solid at really any of the champion types. We got Unstoppable Glaive again, so another option for Unstoppable. I think Scout Rifle is probably going to be a little bit easier or more consistent in most cases for myself, but if you like Unstoppable Glaive, or if you like glaives in general, you've got that option as well. And the last artifact mod we have in the first row is Anti-Barrier Pulse Rifle. Definitely a better option than sidearms, I would say, in most cases, so not a bad option here. The second row, we've got Shotgun Holster, which will gradually reload your stowed shotguns over time. A lot of people don't really use holster mods too much. I like to use them with fusion rifles for something like Reservoir Burst, but we'll have to see if shotguns have any other potential mods at this season that make it a little bit more interesting. Right now, interesting mod. It only costs one. Could fit it in a little bit easier than normal, but nothing super exciting until we see maybe some other shotgun changes or mods. We've got Trace Rifle Ammo Finder, so if you're using Divinity or anything like that, you can get a nice 1 energy cost ability to get more ammo for your Trace Rifle. Nightmarish Opulence increases the duration of the Psycho Hack origin trait and the effect of the Extrovert origin trait. I believe we had one like this for Psycho Hack last season, which is from the Savathûn Throne World weapons, if I'm correct there. Extrovert origin trait sounds like a new origin trait from one of the weapons from this season, so we'll have to see what that origin trait entails. Next we have Pulse Rifle Targeting, which gives you increased acquisition, accuracy, and aim down sight speed for pulse rifles. Costs 1 now. It's nice to throw on if you're using a pulse rifle, mostly in PvP. And finally we have Sidearm Holster, which I really do not see how this could be very useful in most cases. Holsters are already kind of a hard to use mod or hard to recommend mod in a lot of cases, and for a sidearm I really don't see this being too useful very often, but it's there, it costs 1, and at least we can now eventually unlock all mods on the artifact, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend unlocking this early, but down the line you might want to test it out, see if there's a build you might like using this for. Third row, we've got Shotgun Dexterity, which allows for faster ready and stow speed for shotguns. Another solid, interesting mod, especially if you're going to be switching weapons and switching to your shotgun quite often. We've got Trace Rifle Reserve, so it sounds like Trace Rifles might be an interesting weapon this season. We had Trace Rifle Ammo Finder and Reserves, so both costing 1. Very nice and easy to fit into your builds. We got Unquenchable Thirst, which increases the buff effects of the 2 Excess origin trait and the healing effect of the Soul Drinker origin trait. So that second part I know is from the Vow the Disciple raid weapons, so that's going to be pretty damn interesting. 1 cost helmet armor. We'll have to see kind of how that fits in. But again, at 1 cost, and depending on how much that healing effect increases, and whatever this 2 Excess origin trait is, we don't know what that is yet, or at least I don't know what it is yet. It's only been out for about 45 minutes, but we can definitely see how this mod plays out. Ooh, we've got another one of these mods. This time, instead of, I believe last season was Arc and Solar, now we have Void and Solar with Armor of the Dying Star. This is definitely going to be a huge mod. Last season we had Thermoshock Plating, which was an incredibly, incredibly strong mod. We've got a very similar feeling mod here. Last season I recommended people run their chest piece on Void so that they could have a Void resist, and then the combo Arc Solar resist. I think with this mod, I'd recommend people have their chest pieces on Arc, potentially, to have the Arc resist, and then you can have this combo Solar and Void resist in a second slot and have resistance from all 3 damage types, which is going to be super duper helpful. Really happy that they added a similar mod to Thermoshock Plating this season. This is going to be a top tier mod and definitely something I'm going to want to unlock as quickly as possible. And finally, we have Sidearm Dexterity, which increases ready and stow speed for sidearms. Again, seems like sidearms and trace rifles are kind of the thing for this season so far. Sidearms, not seeing too much where that's going to come into play. I think trace rifles could be interesting, though. We'll have to see what we got going on here. So this is interesting. This is very interesting. We have Overload Trace Rifle, which we've never had before, but at the same time we kind of have always had because Divinity. So this is very interesting in that you don't have to use div for overload. You can use div for overload and then not have to use this mod, or you can use any of the potential legendary trace rifles that we now have, or there's a couple other exotic trace rifles as well, to still get the overload stone. Obviously, you would lose the debuff and the big crit spot from Divinity, but this is interesting. This is interesting. It definitely is and gives us more options than just the SMG auto rifle that everybody did not particularly like last season. A lot of people ended up either using the Void Overload grenades or Divinity itself. Now you can still use Divinity, or you can use any other trace rifle, which I assume, if it's like Divinity, these Overload trace rifles will work very, very well. Divinity always like insta-stuns stuff when it hits it, and so if the other trace rifles have that same ability to just like right away get the stun, this will definitely be significantly better than the Overload Overload auto rifles or SMGs were. Next we have Revitalizing Blast, which stunning a champion causes it to ignite and clear your shield stun. Really not sure what that means, to be quite honest. Stunning a champion, basically it allows you to get a little bit extra damage, but I'm not sure what clearing your shield stun entails. I really have no idea what that means, if that's something new, if that means like you can just stun it again immediately, like as if, like there's usually the ability like on an overload or a unstoppable, for example, you can't stun it again for a little bit. Maybe this clears it and allows you to stun it again. I'm not 100% sure what that is entailing. Next we have Withering Heat, where causing damage with a solar ability weakens champions for a short duration. This is a 6 energy cost, so that's pretty high, but this is a Solar 3.0 season. So if people are using solar abilities and solar subclasses, depending on how strong this debuff is, and depending especially on if it potentially stacks with things like Divinity or Tether or any of the other debuffs, this could be very strong. This could be either very strong for raids, or even if it doesn't stack with some of those things, if you're running solar abilities in more of like a GM setting or maybe a dungeon setting where you're not necessarily going to have a debuff for every single situation, or just if you're going in for potentially solo type content and running into champions and stuff, this could be very, very strong. Next we have Molten Overload, so we do have a replacement for the Void Overload grenades. This time we're going to have Solar Overload grenades. So this is huge. This is going to be very, very, very good. Again, if people are going to be on Solar subclasses potentially because of Solar 3.0, you've got Molten Overload, which costs 2. You've got Withering Heat, which costs 6. So you can both overload, especially on an overload champion specifically, if you throw a grenade at it, for example, it would stun the overload and debuff the overload if you're running both of these. And this only costs 8, so you can still have 2 energy to do something else with, whether it be a half upgrade plus 5 mod, or if you have Artifice armor, you could potentially run a bomber slot or bomber mod and then run both of these, one in your Artifice slot. This is a really nice combo. And now that we have overload grenades on solar, another reason to run solar during Solar 3.0 season. And finally, we have Glaive of Dreams, where while you have a glaive equipped, the unstable essence buff gained by picking up objects dropped by nightmares has double its normal duration. If the unstable essence is anything like the essence on the moon in the moon public event, it's a really big damage buff. So this is interesting. I don't know if it only buffs the glaive. It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like as long as you have a glaive equipped, it will give you that extra damage buff for double its normal duration on anything that you're using. So might push people towards running glaives, and depending on the content that this is going to have, if there are unstoppables in it, you could run the unstoppable glaive. You could then have Glaive of Dreams, and you could have, some sort of heavy that's going to just slay out and doing significantly more damage for significantly more time, as long as you have the glaive and you have this mod. One thing is this is a arms mod, so that is going to be interesting on where it's going to slot in. I don't know if I assume this will be in one of the 2 middle slots where champion mods would also go. So if you needed 2 champion mods, you couldn't necessarily do 2 champion mods and Glaive of Dreams. However, if you have Artifice armor, that would be huge, because you'd be able to run, let's say, Unstoppable Glaive and, I don't know, Anti-Barrier Pulse Rifle, and then still run Glaive of Dreams in the Artifice slot, or you could do it however you wanted to combo it, which would be very strong. So Artifice Armor, a couple different places here already showing that it's going to really be strong. And if you don't already know this, the Master Dungeon, which is coming out Friday, is going to have the ability for Artifice Armor to drop again. So we've got a new dungeon coming out, and the Master version will also have Artifice Armor, so we're going to have two different ways to farm Artifice Armor. Highly recommend doing that, it looks like, for this coming season. And the final row, where we usually get some pretty interesting mods, we have Classy Restoration, where activating your solar class ability grants you Restoration. That sounds like some sort of healing, I would assume. That's pretty strong. I mean, for Hunter especially, I would say, with a very low cooldown on their class ability, having the ability to just heal on dodge, that sounds insane. That sounds really, really good. Titans and Warlocks kind of already have a little bit of like built-in healing, especially Warlocks if you're running Healing Rift. I guess you could run Empowering Rift, or maybe have a stronger reason to run Empowering Rift and then run this and then still also get healing. So that could be kind of interesting. But I think on Hunter especially, this is going to be potentially very, very, very good. Almost like a Wormhusk Crown type of thing, except in a mod. So an exotic perk mod that's really strong. That could be very, very strong. Next we have Radiant Orbs, where picking up an Orb of Power makes you Radiant. I need to look at what Radiant means. I know they have different like verbiage and stuff like that now. So I just looked it up in the patch notes, and Radiant is saying that your weapons are enhanced by the power of the Traveler and deal increased damage to foes. So this sounds like almost like a Weapons of Light or you know, the Well from the Warlock, or Empowering Rift, or anything sort of like that, or High Energy Fire type of thing. So interesting. Interesting. Again, it'll depend on if it stacks with things, and the problem with this is orbs, just with them being nerfed so hard last season, there aren't nearly as many orbs as there used to be. If this was a couple seasons back and you just made orbs by having masterworked weapons still, this would be insanely strong. But now that most people aren't really running the orb generation on their helmets, and really the only way you're going to get orbs is from supers, not as strong. We'll have to see again how much of a buff this is, how consistently you can get it. It's not bad. It's definitely, you can potentially build around it, and this is nice because if you specifically build around it, you can yourself wear the helmet mod with the orb generation, pick up your own orbs, and have the ability to be radiant and stuff like that. It'd be really good for potential solo type stuff. Or if you have a team comp where more people are willing to switch or change up their builds and be like, hey, let's run the helmet mods that give us the ability to make more orbs. Could be really good. It's a little bit finicky. Again, this would be insane a couple seasons ago. Right now, I'm questioning it, especially at 5 energy cost. That's pretty expensive. We'll have to see like what other things can slot in the class item, but possible, definitely possible. Next, we have Rays of Precision, where while radiant, solar precision final blows cause combatants to ignite. So that's interesting, and obviously would pair interestingly with Radiant Orbs. The problem is, right away, you can see that this has a 5 energy cost, this has a 6 energy cost. So it sounds like Bungie would have thought that that would be a little too strong, because you can't have 11 energy cost in one slot. These are both class item mods, so you cannot pair these together. We'll have to see. Again, it seems we'll have to see what other ways you can become Radiant. Like, this would seem like a pretty decent way to become Radiant. Maybe there's more ways to become Radiant, but again, you cannot pair these together anyway. So interesting, but at the moment, it just seems a little potentially tough to be consistently proccing. Well, again, we'll have to see the different fragments and aspects, and I could see this being very strong with more strong solar builds, like once we kind of see what fragments and aspects and all that potential options we have for builds. This could be very, very interesting with Ignite giving us more damage. We'll have to also see how much damage Ignite actually gives. Again, in the patch notes, Ignite gives a large damaging solar explosion in an area around the target. So how big is large? How much is damage? Like, all these things are stuff we have to kind of test. I could see this being very strong. I could see this being maybe too hard to proc, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see. Next, we have Flame Harvesting, where solar exotic final blows grant solar elemental wells. Okay, now this is gnarly. Like, that is very gnarly. Again, if this ends up being strong, you won't be able to use this, which it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with each other anyway. But if solar elemental wells, obviously void elemental wells were extremely strong for different builds last season. If solar elemental wells end up being very strong for builds this season, solar exotic final blow, that's it. Like, does that mean like every kill I get with a solar exotic, I'm just getting a solar elemental well? Because if that is like the game might break from how many elemental wells that would be if that's true. I feel like there has to be some sort of a cooldown for this. Otherwise, I don't understand. Galahorn exists. Vex Mythoclast could still actually be kind of interesting. I mean, any solar exotic primary type weapon that you're just constantly killing stuff. But again, Galahorn is the first thing that comes to my mind. Galahorn's already insane. This is wow. Like I have again, it depends on like what we can put together for solar elemental will builds and stuff like that. But like in the worst case, it would still be really strong. Again, I have to think there's at least some cooldown to this. But if not, like I don't know. There's just going to be solar elemental wells like everywhere. That's crazy, crazy, crazy. And finally, we have Solar Fulmination, where your ignitions do increased damage in an increased radius. So going back to Ignite, which this one costs 3. So this actually could be paired with Raise of Precision, where if you become Radiant, you get Precision Final Blows to cause combatants to ignite, and then the ignitions that you are having from those ignites are doing increased damage in a bigger radius. So like these two could very much pair well together. It only costs 9. You actually can do that. Again, that's going to depend on how you can become Radiant with different builds and such. Well, it'd be crazy. Actually, that wouldn't be possible. Never mind. But this is interesting. Interesting. Again, depending on how strong Ignite is, we've got kind of two mods here that are going to really pair well together. And even if, let's say, Ignite's a little bit less strong and you want to go more solar elemental wells, you've got this mod right here. And technically, you could still become Radiant. Like, you wouldn't be able to pair this Radiant Orbs with these two other ignition mods that kind of go off of Radiant, but you could become Radiant still with Radiant Orbs and then also play off of Solar Elemental Wells. Like you got a lot of options here. There's definitely a lot of interesting builds. It's very interesting because it seems like there's multiple mods that pair well together, but there's also certain combinations that you literally will not be able to do. So it's going to be really interesting to see like what ends up being strongest, or maybe there's going to be different situations where different mods are interesting. Like this is a really cool season, I can already say right off the bat, because all these mods are like completely new. Like usually we get a mod that's like very similar to mods we've seen in the past or something, but all 5 of these mods here, completely new. Trace Rifle Overload changes the game in terms of being able to run a potential non-exotic Trace Rifle for Overload stun. We've got, again, more ignition stuff here with Stunning Champions. Again, this is going to be interesting in terms of like what the clear your shield stun means, but again, more ignites, right? Like more ignites, and this right here, like that's another combination, right? Revitalizing Blast, where just stunning a champion, that's it. Just stunning a champion, causing it to ignite, and then that ignition doing more damage and increased radius, like that could be really strong to take down champions and potentially AoE things around the champion, combining these two. And that only costs 7, so you still have an extra 3. You couldn't really pair it with much else. You could still also pair it with Molten Overload. You would have to, again, have Artifice Armor. Again, another huge, like Artifice Armor is going to be insane this season, I feel like, because to have these 3 mods potentially, you could throw a nade to stun an Overload, which would then cause it to ignite and clear your shield stun. Again, I don't know what that part means, but we'll probably figure that out pretty soon. And then also, that ignition will do increased damage and increased radius with these 3 mods. Again, you can only do that with Artifice Armor, and you'd still have 1 energy cost left over. So you could have like a +5 Recov, for example, or something like that. I think +5 is Recov only 1, or +5 Recov might be 2. You might have to do like +5 Discipline, I think would be 1 energy. But insane artifact, honestly. Like this is definitely Season of the Solar, which we probably already knew with Solar 3.0. I assume next season will be very similar to this in Arc. But we've got some crazy new build potential with some of these mods. We've got a very easy, just like this is a really strong mod, 100%, throw it on your chest piece, nice mod here. And then we've got some Trace Rifle kind of throwing in. We got a little bit more glaive throwing in stuff. So Trace Rifles, glaives, solar stuff, extra resist. Some really great mods, some really interesting mods. This is definitely going to shake up the meta, and I am super intrigued to start leveling this and get rolling on it. Thank you all so much for watching this first look at the Nightmare Harvester. Hope you enjoyed kind of seeing my reactions and just interesting kind of thoughts, and maybe spark your mind in terms of some builds you may want to start looking into. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.